We are now 10 days away from the United States of America presidential election, and last night we witnessed the final debate between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. Was it enough to turn the race around for the incumbent? Did Joe Biden manage to avoid any significant bloopers? And did the host's mute button make it a more civilized and coherent affair than the first debate we saw 2 weeks ago? The answer to the latter question is yes. It was way more coherent. There was actually a lot more policy in it. So we're going to discuss policy more than we did last time. Last time it was just will all of these, really aggressive interruptions from Donald Trump play well or badly with the American public? Now we can actually talk about, different policies towards coronavirus and climate change, which is, it's a nice change for us. I will be discussing that with Ash Sarkar. And how are you doing, Ash?
I'm good. I'm broadcasting to you live from the plague pit.
Exactly. I know. I was going to bring that up in one moment, but let's go straight into that because you've got something in common with Donald Trump, right? Which is that when you get a certain novel virus, you just work through it.
Yeah, man. If anything, it's made me more powerful.
Well, has it taken 20 years off?
I think it really has. I'm now 8 years old.
I mean, for anyone who doesn't follow you on Twitter, we should clarify, Ash has coronavirus, but it seems like you are, it seems quite mild, doesn't it? Or am I underplaying it?
No, you know what? I think not to do a whole public service announcement thing, but what this has shown to me is that you should definitely get a test, even if you don't think that your symptoms line up with the government guidelines. Because I had kind of a mild temperature and I had a headache, and I was like, oh, it's 100% definitely a cold. And my hypochondriac partner was like, you have got coronavirus and you're about to die, get a test. And that's the only reason why I did it. And so I was quite surprised by the positive results. So I think if you're feeling a bit iffy, get the test, because there's a whole load of ways this virus presents in different people, and the government guidance just hasn't caught up with it.
Okay, you made a good contrast with Donald Trump there. Even though you were working through the virus, that was a much more responsible, public service announcement when it comes to health than his one was. We're also joined tonight by Ryan Grimm. Ryan is DC bureau chief at The Intercept and the new host of the brilliant Deconstructed podcast. Ryan, welcome to the show.
Hey, it's great to see you.
So Ryan was slightly pixelated there, which I know isn't going to be continuing throughout the show. So hopefully we'll get that sorted in one moment. After we analyse the debate, we are going to talk later in the show about the Tories, the continuing row over the Tories' refusal to fund free school meals over the holidays. And we're also going to speak to Tolu Olusoji live from Lagos about Nigeria's End SARS movement. The president today has admitted that 69 people have been killed in the wave of protests after the government have been sort of downplaying it for the last few days. And finally, me and Ash are going to talk you through the latest revelations about Ghislaine Maxwell, obviously the alleged accomplice of Jeffrey Epstein. There are lots of new revelations from a now, it's still redacted, but a now released document from a 2016 court case. Let's go straight on to that first story. First of all, though, you know the score. Share the show link. Tweet on the hashtag Tysky. Let's go straight to that first story. Right. So let's go. The second and final debate between Donald Trump and Joe Biden was very different from the first. So this was mainly because the anchor had a mute button. This meant that Donald Trump couldn't just derail the whole thing by aggressively attacking Joe Biden all the time. My fear was that this would allow Joe Biden a bit more time for him to stumble over his own words and struggle to end sentences. That didn't quite happen. I think it was actually not a bad night for Joe Biden. I'll get the views from both of my guests as we continue this discussion. But first of all, I want to get straight into a clip. And this is probably, in a way, the biggest policy disagreement of the night, actually. And it is now a debate which is familiar to everyone in this country, probably most countries in the world right now, which is lockdowns or no lockdown. How should we face a pandemic?
Let me talk about your two.
Excuse me, I take full responsibility. It's not my fault that it came here. It's China's fault. And you know what? It's not Joe's fault that it came here either. It's China's fault. They kept it from going into the rest of China for the most part, but they didn't keep it from coming out to the world, including Europe and ourselves. This is dangerous. And you catch it. And I caught it. I learned a lot. Great doctors, great hospitals. And now I recovered. 99.9 of young people recover. 99% of people recover. We have to recover. We can't close up our nation. We have to open our school, and we can't close up our nation, or you're not going to have a nation.
What I would say is I'm going to shut down the virus, not the country. It's his ineptitude that caused the country to have to shut down in large part. Why businesses have gone under, why schools are closed, why so many people have lost their living, and why they're concerned. Those other concerns are real. That's why he should have been, instead of in a sand trap in his golf course, he should have been negotiating with Nancy Pelosi and the rest of the Democrats and Republicans about what to do about the acts they were passing for billions of dollars to make sure people had the capacity.
But you haven't ruled out more shutdowns.
Well, no, I'm not shutting down the neighbor, but look, you need standards. The standard is if you have a reproduction rate in a community that's above a certain level, everybody says, slow up, more social distancing, do not open bars and do not open gymnasiums, do not open until you get this under control.
All he does is talk about shutdowns, but forget about him. His Democrat governors, Cuomo in New York, you look at what's going on in California, you look at Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Democrats all, they're shut down so tight and they're dying. They're dying. And he supports all these people. All he talks about is shutdowns. No, we're not going to shut down, and we have to open our schools. And it's like, as an example, I have a young son. He also tested positive. By the time I spoke to the doctor the second time, he was fine. It just went away. Young people, I guess it's their immune system.
I take full responsibility. It's China's fault is a very Trumpian phrase. But to go to the substance, I want to bring you back in, Ryan, because this is, I suppose your general thoughts on the fact that there was a bit of a policy debate and who that benefited. Does that mean that, Biden got to put on show his better thought through policies than Donald Trump? Or, did it make Donald Trump seem like a more normal president? And then also on this particular coronavirus issue, do you think the fact that Donald Trump is trying to position Biden as the lockdown candidate might lose Biden some votes, maybe among people who run small businesses and things like that?
Well, neither candidate is particularly coherent or articulate in general. And, even after, weeks of debate prep and clearly a lot of coaching and self-coaching, you could see particularly Trump telling himself almost, keep it calm, keep it calm, keep it calm. You still don't wind up with any impressive articulation of any policy agenda where you would be proud as Americans to say, okay, these are two well-defined competing visions that we can choose from. Well, what we did get is two people that didn't swing at each other. And neither of them, as far as we know, were infected with coronavirus at the time that they were on the stage, and perhaps potentially intending to infect their opponent. So, it was a step up in that sense. But it would be harder to go much lower than the last debate was. Now, there are so few undecided voters at this point that I think, to your question, the answer is probably no. Polls have it down to 4% or so. And the people who are undecided at this point in the election are so disengaged from politics that the chance that they were watching that debate is extraordinarily slim. You could probably find, count on two hands the number of people who are authentically undecided and turned on the television at 9 o'clock to sift through the varying policy positions being presented by these two candidates. That's just not where we are right now.
Yeah. Ash, I want to bring you in on this because my worry is that people say they're undecided, but no, they're not. Sorry, no, they say they're not undecided. They say they're going to vote for Biden, but actually they could secretly, at the last minute, towards Trump. I'm not necessarily predicting that. I'm just saying that's one of my fears, and he's probably trying to push those buttons. Which means, are you having second thoughts about voting for the Democrat? Are you thinking that maybe you would prefer the kind of white supremacist guy to go back into the White House, and he's trying to push those buttons constantly?
There is famously that kind of shy reactionary effect, and it's something that we see in this country. Whereas you want to be seen to adhere to a certain set of social values, particularly when the right-wing candidate is someone who comes across as incompetent or lacks credibility. You get in the voting booth and you're like, well, actually, it's within my interests, whether those are racial interests or economic interests, to vote for the right-wing party. I think, however, in this case, I would struggle to see that happening in quite the same way. Trump's base is pretty solid. You know who they are. There's a really strong subcultural element to Trump's base and that sense of belonging. And you also have a lot of Republicans who voted for the party out of loyalty in 2016 who have been bitterly disappointed with the kind of, coarsening of the office that Trump has stood for. There are lots of people who stand for a certain amount of civility in politics and get spooked by too much vulgarity and want some kind of, return to, the equilibrium of, center-right liberal technocracy, and that looks like a good result. So I don't think that you are going to see so much of that kind of shy Trumper effect. What does worry me, having watched the debate last night, is that debates favor primary colors. And by polarizing the coronavirus pandemic response into either pro or anti-lockdown, that's quite a dangerous thing to do. And I think it's not something that progressives should instinctively get behind, because obviously lockdown is important for getting the R rate down, setting up a functioning test, trace, and isolate system, identifying those who are clinically vulnerable and what kind of support and care they need, so on and so forth. You also need adequate economic support measures to deal with the fact that businesses are not going to have the kind of financial resilience on their own to deal with interrupted functioning, all of that kind of stuff. But a second lockdown, right, is itself an admission of policy failure. It's an admission that you didn't do those things adequately, that you didn't control the virus adequately, that you didn't have the measures in place so that people could self-isolate safely, that you didn't have contact tracing in place, and that also potentially there was a huge problem in terms of importing cases from abroad as well. And neither Trump nor Biden could make those points. They couldn't actually talk with that level of detail. They couldn't talk about what a pandemic response would look like here in the second wave. In lots of ways, it was relitigating the response to the first one.
One of the problems that neither of them are particularly articulate, and it can be quite a difficult thing to do to break down that particular binary. The next clip I want to go to is, what I thought was going to be a really interesting element of this presidential election, which was that, the country, the United States, needs a second round of relief in terms of financial relief, or so people can survive the second lockdown. It looks like they're going to have one like we are going to have one. Now, the Democrats are in a really difficult position here because, in a way, the worse the economy gets, the more likely their candidate is to win. At the same time, they control the House of Representatives, and they don't want to be seen as blockers. They don't want to be seen as people who are intentionally withholding relief to the country to try and, win politically. This played out in the debate last night. We'll go to that clip, and then I want Ryan's take on this.
As of tonight, more than 12 million people are out of work. And as of tonight, 8 million more Americans have fallen into poverty, and more families are going hungry every day. Those hit hardest are women and people of color. They see Washington fighting over a relief bill. Mr. President, why haven't you been able to get them the help they need? 30 seconds here.
Because Nancy Pelosi doesn't want to approve it. I do.
But you're the president.
I do, but I still have to get. Unfortunately, that's one of the reasons I think we're going to take over the House, because of her. Nancy Pelosi doesn't want to approve anything because she'd love to have some victories on a date called November 3rd. Nancy Pelosi does not want to approve it. We are ready, willing, and able to do something. Don't forget, we've already approved 3 plans, and it's gone through, including the Democrats, in all fairness. This one she doesn't want. It's near the election because she thinks it helps her politically. I think it hurts her politically.
All right, Mr. Vice President.
The Republican leader in the United States Senate said he can't pass it. He will not be able to pass it. He does not have Republican votes. Why isn't he talking to his Republican friends?
Let me follow up with you, Vice President
we made a
Biden,
deal,
because
the Republicans
let me
will
ask
pass
Vice
it.
President Biden a question. You are the leader of the Democratic Party. Why have you not pushed the Democrats to get a deal for the American people?
Well, I have, and they have pushed it. Look, they passed this act all the way back in the beginning of the summer. This is like it's not new. It's been out there. This HEROES Act has been sitting there. What's the matter with
bill
these
that was
guys?
passed in the House was a bailout of badly run, high crime, Democrat, all run by Democrats, cities and states. It was a way of getting a lot of money, billions and billions of dollars to these states. It was also a way of getting a lot of money from our people's pockets to people that come into our country illegally.
If I get elected, I'm running as a proud Democrat, but I'm going to be an American president. I don't see red states and blue states. What I see is American, United States. And folks, every single state out there finds themselves in trouble. They're going to start laying off, whether they're red or blue, cops, firefighters, first responders, teachers, because they have to balance their budget. And the founders were smart. They allowed the federal government to deficit spend to compensate for the United.
That was very much that debate playing out there. Trump was making the accusation that the Democrats are intentionally not passing a second relief bill because they think it will, advantage them in the presidential election. Joe Biden, they're saying, look, they've already passed one relief act, which you won't back. Ryan, I want you to sort of decode this for a mainly British audience. Who's in the right? What's going on there? I mean, it would make sense if Nancy Pelosi was playing politics here, but at the same time, it doesn't seem like Donald Trump has played this very well. I think he walked away from talks for a new stimulus package quite recently. What do you make of all of this, that particular row?
Right. And first of all, that clip that you played is Donald Trump's entire presidency crystallized into a minute or two, where he begins with such promise, saying that, people need help. Democrats are standing in the way of that help for their own cynical political reasons. And if you come to a deal with me, I will make sure that the Republicans in the Senate, Mitch McConnell, go along and we get people the help they need. Those are the promising words of a potential leader. When Biden responds and says, well, we passed a bill, you get the other Trump. The other Trump comes out and says, oh, yeah, well, that bill was going to give billions of dollars to democratically run cities that are crime infested and where immigrants run wild. He's completely contradicting himself from one to the next as his real kind of bigotry and reactionary politics come out at the last. And then he gives Biden this softball that he can just crush and say, I'm not going to punish the American people just because they happen to live in a city that's run by a political opponent. Now, to your question about who's right or not, it is a little bit complicated. It's true that the House of Representatives did pass the HEROES Act. They themselves, though, said at the time that this was a messaging bill and it was the start of negotiations. So to then turn around and say, well, you should just pass this into law and sign it, is not exactly fair to Republicans. It is also true that Mitch McConnell, who is the Senate Republican leader, has said that he doesn't want to push through any more stimulus before the election. He has told Donald Trump that privately, and he has essentially said it publicly. The understanding among the American press corps is that Mitch McConnell is cutting ties with Donald Trump, feels like Trump is a lost cause, and would rather have the money and the energy spent trying to save the Senate than to save Donald Trump. The question of Pelosi is more complicated. She's very poor at articulating her own reasons. You may be sensing a pattern among American politicians here. For her position, she had a famously terrible interview with CNN's Wolf Blitzer, where she sort of implied that the reason that she was holding up the money was so that Donald Trump couldn't put his name on checks going out before the election. Now privately, she has told her colleagues that she's very much pushing for a deal, because she feels like she needs to get Biden a significant amount of money now, so that when he comes back in January and February and needs another round of stimulus, that the price tag won't be as shocking to people. You do it on an installment plan, some now and some later. Yet she has not been transparent with her colleagues about what the negotiation positions are, either of Mnuchin or of her, and just factually and objectively, she has not struck a deal. It presumably is within her power to take what the Treasury Department, Trump's Treasury Department, is offering, and then stick it to McConnell. And just as a matter of fact, she has not done that. So you have to assume that her what she told Wolf Blitzer is at least somewhat true, that she fears a political benefit could accrue to President Trump.
I mean, yeah, what you're saying there is, Trump threw away an opportunity to actually maybe, hammer home on a Democratic weakness because he was so distracted by immigration, as always. The next clip we're going to show is specifically about immigration. So they were asked about it. The interaction here is quite interesting.
Children are brought here by coyotes and lots of bad people, cartels, and they're brought here, and they used to use them to get into our country. We now have as strong a border as we've ever had. We're over 400 miles of brand new wall. You see the numbers, and we let people in, but they have to come in legally, and they come in through
But
merit.
how will you reunite these kids with their families,
Let me just tell you,
Mr.
they
President?
built cages. They used to say, I built the cages, and then they had a picture in a certain newspaper, and it was a picture of these horrible cages, and they said, look at these cages, President Trump built them, and then it was determined they were built in 2014. That was him.
Do you have a plan to reunite the kids?
Yes, we're working on it we're trying very hard, but a lot of these kids come out without the parents. They come over through cartels and through coyotes and through gangs.
Vice President Biden, let me bring you into this
525
conversation. Quick response and then another question to you.
These 500 plus kids came with parents. They separated them at the border to make it a disincentive to come to begin with. Real tough. We're really strong. And guess what? They cannot, it's not coyotes didn't bring them over. Their parents were with them. They got separated from their parents. And it makes us a laughing stock and violates every notion of who we are as a nation.
Let me ask you a follow-up
Kristen,
question.
they did it. We changed the policy.
Your response
they
to that?
They did it. We changed.
did not
They built the
separate
cages.
the
Who built the cages, Joe?
Let's talk about what
Who
we're
built the
talking about.
cages,
Let's
Joe?
talk about what we're talking about. What happened? Parents were ripped, their kids were ripped from their arms and separated.
So, I mean, the topic under discussion, they're completely horrific. You'll remember at the start of Donald Trump's presidency when kids were being separated from their parents at the border. They've stopped that policy. They sort of stopped it midway through the presidency. But it turns out there are over 500 kids who were separated from their parents at the border who the government can now not locate their parents. So they've orphaned over 500 children. Completely horrific. Ash, I want to go to you on this one, though, because the tactic that Donald Trump used there reminded me of one Piers Morgan in conversation with you. I think it must be 2 years ago now, where you were talking about it was a Stop Trump demonstration. You were talking about this policy of separating kids at the border, and Piers Morgan was saying, look, but Obama deported more people than Trump. Trump there using a similar line, which is basically you put more people in cages than we did. What do you make of that, particular interplay, I suppose, for someone who's been in a very similar debate?
Well, the thing is that Trump is speaking the truth in that regard. The kind of deportation infrastructure that was set up under the Obama administration was vast. It led to the deportation of, I think, over 2 million people. And the thing about Donald Trump is that his vulgarity and his coarseness allows for the laundering of Obama and therefore by proxy Biden's reputation on this particular issue. And of course, the separation of children from parents as a means to discourage irregular forms of migration is a step above, right? That is a deepening and a sharpening of that kind of cruelty. It flies in the face of pretty much, every international law there is about the right to a family life and the rights of children. But Trump's not wrong when he says that he didn't invent this infrastructure, that's something that he inherited from Obama. Biden, however, because of that, gratuitous cruelty of the child separation policy, is able to skate over that and tell a very human story about parents and children being ripped from one another's arms, the orphaning, as you said, of these 500 children. But nowhere, again, from Biden, because he doesn't have to, is there a sense of where he'll depart from the policies that he was a part of when he was vice president.
What's going on here? Because when I was looking at that debate, that section of the debate, I was, I suppose, maybe slightly surprised, because in this country, whenever you see sort of two top politicians vying for election and discussing immigration, they're generally saying, I'm tougher than the other guy. In this particular debate, I mean, Trump was obviously saying some awful, tough things, but they were also saying, no, you're worse to Latino immigrants, especially. So they weren't trying to prove themselves to be the tougher, but actually to be the kinder one to migrants. It seemed to me at some points. And that's because both now are targeting Latino voters. Is that correct? And do both of them see, migration as a tool to win over white voters as less of an issue than it was in 2016? What's going on there?
Yeah, so partly it's about winning Latino voters. Partly it's that the policy was so horrific that even Trump doesn't want to defend it. But most importantly, it's actually about winning suburban women in the suburbs. The former political lines broke down in rural areas where both Democrats and Republicans were competing for the votes of these white working class folks, whereas now the battle has moved into the suburbs with Democrats dominating there, and the child separation policy very much triggered a further move away from Trump in the American suburbs and towards Democrats as the gratuitous cruelty, as Ashna said, was so on display. And so Trump has been very vocal recently about trying to win back, particularly women in the suburbs, and you could see this as of a piece with that. I also want to agree with Ashna's analysis completely, but add one thing that almost nobody knows about the statistics around the Obama administration's deportation policy, and it's true, they deserve all of the condemnation that they get, plus some, but they also engaged in some statistical gimmickry in that the Bush administration and administrations prior to that, if they caught somebody at the border and immediately deported them, you put them on a bus, send them back across the border to Mexico, that was happening thousands of times, hundreds or thousands of times a day, and those were not being counted as deportations. They were not being charged, etc. What the Obama administration did is said, we're going to count those. Every single one of those we're going to count as deportations. And the reason they wanted to juice their stats was so that they could then tell Republicans, look how hardcore and rough we are when it comes to immigration enforcement. We're doing our part, so now you need to do your part, and we can come together and come up with some type of comprehensive immigration reform. Republicans, some Republicans saw through that. Other Republicans were never going to compromise on immigration because they were going, year by year, further and further nativist and further right. And so while the Obama administration was building up this draconian deportation machine, they were also kind of juking their stats by adding in deportations that previously wouldn't have been counted as such.
We've got 1,500 people watching the show. Share the show link. We want to get that up to 2,000 by the end of the show this evening. We are going to go straight to another clip, and this is going to be another one where I need you, Ryan, to decode it. It was the most confusing part of the debate for me, probably for most of our mainly British audience, and I think also, from what I've heard, also many of the American audience. So this is both Trump and Biden kind of accusing each other of various forms of corruption.
I don't make money from China. You do. I don't make money from Ukraine. You do. I don't make money from Russia. You made $3.5 million, Joe, and your son gave you. They even have a statement that we have to give 10% to the big man. You're the big man, I think. I don't know. Maybe you're not, but you're the big man, I think. Your son said we have to give 10% to the big man. Joe, what's that all about?
With regard to Ukraine, we had this whole question about whether or not, because he was on the board, I later learned of a Burisma, a company, that somehow I had done something wrong. Yet every single solitary person, when he was going through his impeachment, testifying under oath who worked for him, said, I did my job impeccably. I carried out U.S. policy. Not one single solitary thing was out of line. Not a single thing, number one. Number two, the guy who got in trouble in Ukraine was this guy trying to bribe the Ukrainian government to say something negative about me, which they would not do and did not do because it never, ever, ever happened. My son has not made money in terms of this thing about, what are you talking about, China. I have not had the only guy made money from China is this guy. He's the only one. Nobody else has made money from China.
That whole exchange was really confusing. I mean, obviously, it seems what is going on is that Donald Trump is trying to repeat the 2016 thing of it's the October surprise. That's what you call it, isn't it? When the opposition sort of reveals something about their opponent. Last time it was Hillary's emails. Now they're trying to make it Hunter Biden's emails. He's Joe Biden's son. And correct me if I'm wrong, he does seem to have got a few weird jobs in oil companies when he wasn't qualified because of the connections he has with the then vice president. Kind of dodgy, but it doesn't seem to be landing. It's all kind of confusing, and none of it, as far as I understand, directly implicates Joe Biden at this point.
Right. There's no question that Hunter Biden leveraged his last name and his relationship with his father to extract cash from around the globe, whether it's Ukraine, Romania, or China. The best defense Democrats have mustered for that one is that, well, that's not that big of a deal, and lots of people are corrupt like that. But Joe Biden himself never did anything for Hunter Biden and wasn't involved in these. So this latest round of Trump attacks is an attempt to say that no, in fact, Joe Biden himself was involved in that. That cryptic reference he made to, quote, the big guy comes from an email which has been confirmed as authentic by one of the people on it. And one of the people on the email said that when Hunter would refer to Joe Biden, he would refer to him either as the big guy or as my chairman. And the email listed the way that they would parcel out a potential, basically, company investment opportunity. Hunter would get 20%, and Hunter would hold 10% for, quote, the big guy. That's what the email said. At this point, all we know is that could just be bluster. That could be a couple of people scheming and hoping. We also have seen messages since then that from Hunter saying, my chairman is an emphatic no. Now, that he doesn't want to be part of this deal. Now, if that's true, that means at least that they spoke about the deal. The Wall Street Journal has reported on this last night, and they said they examined corporate records that showed that Joe Biden was not involved in setting this up. The business partner, I think Tony Bobulinski, I think his name is, says that he was involved in the beginning, didn't get involved in the end. The scheme, like many of the schemes put together by Hunter and his partners, never came to fruition. And incidentally, two of them have since been convicted of fraud. One of them is in prison, and one of them is awaiting sentencing. And so three of them have kind of turned and are now spilling the beans on Hunter. But they so far have not been able to show any proof that Joe Biden himself engaged at this level.
We've got two more clips for you. The first one I'm going to show you is, I suppose this is the big question for many of our audience in particular, which is that if Biden wins, and the polls at the moment look like he will, obviously, I don't feel particularly relaxed about this. Anything could happen over the next 10 days, and the polls could obviously be wrong. But it looks like he is obviously the favorite. He's up by many points in many of the key swing states. The question, though, is how will he govern? How left-wing will he be? And here, I mean, his history as a legislator is not particularly left-wing. As a vice president, not particularly left-wing. He also won the primaries by saying, I am the moderate candidate. I'm not in favor of Medicare for all, et cetera, et cetera. But there are some people who are arguing that even though he's no Bernie Sanders, that field, so having Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren up there on stage, has pushed his platform to some degree to the left. So I picked out the most left-wing moments from Joe Biden in that debate. Let's take a look.
People are making $6, $7, $8 an hour. These first responders, we all clap for as they come down the street because they've allowed us to make it. What's happening? They deserve a minimum wage of $15. Anything below that puts you below the poverty level. And there is no evidence that when you raise the minimum wage, businesses go out of business. That is simply not true. The difference between the president, I think health care is not a privilege, it's a right. Everyone should have the right to have affordable health care. And I am very proud of my plan. It's gotten endorsed by all the major labor unions, as well as a whole range of other people who, in fact, are concerned in the medical field. This is something that's going to save people's lives, and this is going to give some people an opportunity an opportunity to have health care for their children. How many of you home are worried and rolling around in bed tonight wondering what in God's name you're going to do if you get sick? Because you've lost your home insurance, your health insurance, your company's gone under. We have to provide health insurance for people at an affordable rate, and that's what I do. No one should be going to jail because they have a drug problem. They should be going to rehabilitation, not to jail. We should fundamentally change the system, and that's what I'm going to do.
It's quite left wing. I mean, they were sort of handpicked. There are also other moments where he's saying, "I will obviously not implement Medicare for all. We need our private health insurance, etc., etc." But Ash, I want to go to you. Could Joe Biden be by accident the most radical president, the radical left president? Well, he's not radical left, but radical to the left president that you have had in a generation, or that the Americans have had in a generation?
Yes, in the sense that there's not much competition. He's moving into some of the space which is afforded by the coronavirus crisis, and also it's by necessity because of the growing popularity of the left within his own party. And one of the things that that's starting to do is change the complexion of even the Democratic Party machine. So you do have people who've got more progressive politics entering those kind of, staffing roles, those kind of bureaucratic roles than you did before. And that's one of the effects of, Bernie Sanders and that kind of wave of Democrats which followed after him. One of the things that I would perhaps say is that it's really strange to hear Joe Biden make such a principled criticism of a healthcare system where your insurance is tied to your employer, but not go as far as backing Medicare for all. It seems like you're saying, well, this system is terrible, but I'm afraid there's nothing that could improve it very much. To me, and I think this is obviously a very British perspective, but it just seems completely bizarre. I don't know who that position is meant to appeal to. You want one or the other, right? You either want to die in the street or actually have healthcare. Not like you can have half a bandage and be on your way.
And Ryan, I want the inside scoop from you. I read something this week that was suggesting Bernie Sanders might be being lined up as Secretary of Labor. Is there any hope in hell that that's going to happen, or is that just sort of the Biden camp teasing people?
That leak appeared to come from the Sanders camp.
Oh, okay, right. They're putting themselves out there.
As a job application. And if you're the Biden camp, you probably jump at that opportunity, because Bernie Sanders, as a team player inside the administration at a JV level cabinet position, is probably a much softer relationship than a Bernie Sanders on the outside as a senator.
Especially in a knife-edge Senate, right? It could easily be 50-50.
I could totally see that happening.
Let's go to our final clip. It's probably on the most important issue for, the rest of the world, and which is climate change. Very interesting exchange here.
Here's what we can't do. Look at China, how filthy it is. Look at Russia. Look at India. It's filthy. The air is filthy. The Paris Accord, I took us out because we were going to have to spend trillions of dollars, and we were treated very unfairly. When they put us in there, they did us a great disservice. They were going to take away our businesses. I will not sacrifice tens of millions of jobs, thousands and thousands of companies because of the Paris Accord.
I was able to get both all the environmental organizations as well as labor, the people worried about jobs, to support my climate plan. Because what it does, it will create millions of new good-paying jobs. We're going to invest in, for example, 50,000 charging stations on our highways so that we can own the electric car market of the future. In the meantime, China is doing that. We're going to be in a position where we're going to see to it that we're going to take 4 million existing buildings and 2 million existing homes and retrofit them so they don't leak as much energy, saving hundreds of millions of barrels of oil in the process and creating significant number of jobs. And by the way, the whole idea of what this is all going to do, it's going to create millions of jobs, and it's going to clean the environment. Our health and our jobs are at stake.
$6,500 will be taken away from families under his plan, that his plan is an economic disaster. If you look at what he wants to do, if you look at his plan, his environmental plan, you know who developed it? AOC +3. They know nothing about the climate. I mean, she's got a good line of stuff, but she knows nothing about the climate. And they're all hopping through hoops for AOC +3. Look, their real plan costs $100 trillion. If we had the best year in the history of our country for 100 years, we would not even come close to a number like that. When he says buildings, they want to take buildings down because they want to make bigger windows into smaller windows. As far as they're concerned, if you had no window, it would be a lovely thing. Would he close down the oil industry? Would you close down the oil industry?
By the way, I would transition from the oil industry, yes.
Oh,
I would
that's
transition.
a big statement.
It is a big statement.
That's a
because
big statement.
I would stop.
Why would you do that?
Because the oil industry pollutes significantly.
I see.
Here's the deal. But
That's
you
a
can't
big
do
statement.
that. Well, if you let me finish the statement, because it has to be replaced by renewable energy over time. And I'd stop giving to the oil industry, I'd stop giving them federal subsidies. He won't give federal subsidies to the gas, to solar and wind.
Yeah.
Why are we giving it to oil industry?
We actually do give it to solar and wind.
We
and
have
that's
one
maybe the
final
biggest
question.
statement in terms of business. That's the biggest statement.
Okay.
Because
We have
basically
one
what he's
final
saying
question,
is he is
Mr.
going to
President.
destroy the oil industry. Will you remember that, Texas? Will you remember that, Pennsylvania, Oklahoma?
Vice President Biden, let me give you 10 seconds to respond, and then
Ohio.
I have to get to the final question. Vice President Biden.
He takes everything out of context, but the point is, look, we have to move toward a net zero emissions. The first place to do that by the year 2035 is in energy production, by 2050 totally.
That was a really interesting debate to see that in a presidential debate. I can't really imagine that. I wouldn't have imagined that 2 years ago happening in the United States right now. In a way, it seems like AOC really has achieved a lot for climate to be a big issue there. Ash, I want to bring you in because that almost seemed like a more obviously Trump talking about really tiny windows, etc., is a bit bonkers. But I can't really imagine two candidates for prime minister talking so confidently. Obviously, Trump wasn't speaking very confidently, but it seemed like they thought climate change was a vote-winning issue, which I haven't really seen in this country.
There was a level of concreteness to that discussion, which is completely missing from when there have been attempts at similar debates in the UK. When you did have that climate change debate here in the UK during our general election, it was either both so technical or weirdly abstract that it couldn't really, you didn't know how to get a grip on where the discussion was going. 1 minute, people were talking about kilowatts per hour. The next, Jeremy Corbyn was talking about sparrows being reduced. It didn't feel real to anybody. Yeah. Whereas this was actually a slug match about jobs and the future of work. And I think that no matter what side you came down on, it felt tangible and it felt real. And I think that there's real power in that. And I think that that is a testament to the kind of work that AOC +3 have been doing rather successfully. The fact that Donald Trump was sort of forced to speak within her frame, I don't think was a weakness. I don't think that it was a bad thing that she became the totem of these policies. I think that ultimately it shows her success and her cut through. The one thing that I want to say, which has nothing to do with the actual topic of climate change, is that Donald Trump is a funny guy. Like, he's funny to watch. He's entertaining. He's kind of a comedian. So when he was doing all these reaction shots as Biden was speaking of, ooh, like, I couldn't get a grip on it. I was like, what's the word for this? And I was like, oh my God, it's like gossipy. There's like this like strange element of camp which he brings in when he's like playing up to his audience, and especially when he does his weird like I'm a calm baby Trump voice, because he's trying not to like shout or growl or make weird noises. That is just like deeply comedic. And I think that when you contrast that to Biden's speaking style, where he's aiming for like almost like this like West Wing restoration, but can't quite pull it off because he muddles his words and some of the phonetics get bunched together. He does breaking the fourth wall, but the timing is just a bit off. Is that it makes Donald Trump, by comparison, look like a more effective communicator, because he's funny when he means to be.
Yeah, the hatred, the hatred for Trump here among liberals in the United States has blinded them to that reality, that there is this funniness underneath it. Ash, you will love if you go find his speech that he gave in Erie, Pennsylvania, which is this kind of middle of nowhere post-industrial place in Pennsylvania, and he just straight up told his audience of rubes that he clearly thought were rubes, that I never planned to come to Erie, Pennsylvania again, but the polls are not looking very good for me. So unfortunately, here I am. It's like, how can you be at once the most honest and the most dishonest president that this country has ever had? And who else would tell an audience that? And they lapped it up. They absolutely loved it.
I think that people relish somebody who says the unsayable, and so often that's got to do with these norms of politeness which dictate elite level politics and very little to do with honesty. Like, I've been thinking about this a lot this week because the deputy leader of the Labour Party, Angela Rayner, got picked up on a microphone calling a Tory MP scum, and there was obviously this huge outcry. But actually, people in the real world were like, yeah, actually, that's kind of fine. And you've got all of these incidents where politicians say something unguarded and then backtrack, and that's what loses them respect. So when Gordon Brown called Gillian Duffy a bigot and apologized, it nailed in his inauthenticity. Whereas Donald Trump will be like, I'm only here because the polls are bad. And people are like, oh yeah, that's the mark of an honest man, even though he's a commensurate liar. It's an interesting contradiction in there.
I think Biden did manage to do it a couple of times, and they were, people tried to attack him for it, but I thought they were some of his strongest moments. Like when wasn't it to a bunch of military veterans where he says, "Clap, you bastards." Wasn't that in this campaign? Clap, you bastards. And then when anyone asked him, like, are you going to do a Green New Deal? Are you going to do Medicare for all? He'd be like, of course I'm not. You're an idiot. And it did seem fairly like, at least this guy's confident in his views, even if I disagree with them.
Yeah, that's true. That did somewhat work for him, but because he does also at the same time, strive for this West Wing restoration thing that Ash talked about, that it clashes a little bit. But you're right; he did have some of those moments. Where he would attack people in an audience, and there's a certain audience that appreciates that.
And finally, Ryan, is there a sense to which, if Donald Trump does lose now, obviously it was a terrible 4 years, but it does seem like his presidency has maybe, pushed American politics to the left in a weird way. I think sort of his climate denial has actually made progressives or Democrats or whoever we're talking about be slightly more confident in saying, no, actually, we do believe in climate change. We do want to address it. And they've actually, it seems, come up with a few plans, obviously not as much as we need, but much further than Obama went. I think you could say similar things about migration. In that particular debate, Joe Biden said, I made a mistake. Me and Obama made a mistake when it came to migration. So could the sort of vulgarity of Donald Trump actually do quite a lot to strengthen the progressive movement once he's out, and once it's not the left, but once the Democrats, once the not Trumps are back in power?
On those two issues in particular, and those are the most significant ones, he did consolidate Democratic support for strong action on climate change and support for immigrants and for immigration, and both of those issues were contested before Trump. He also brought about this realignment that we're seeing with the suburbs moving more Democratic, and he further polarized the parties so that Democrats are kind of more cohesive, certainly more progressive than they were beforehand, and have a stronger belief that the Republican Party is an enemy than they did before. Whereas before they thought of the Republican Party as something of a misguided negotiating partner.
Ryan, thank you so much for your time this evening. We're going to move on from Biden and Trump now, but I mean, we're going to be talking about it a hell of a lot over the next 10 days. I imagine it's going to be an incredibly busy 10 days for you. So good luck with it all. And yeah, let's hope that, you know, we don't
We'll
have
see.
a catastrophe. Yeah. All right.
Yep.
Nice one.
All right, talk to you later.
Cheers. That was Ryan Grimm, DC Bureau Chief at The Intercept. You can check him out on the Deconstructed podcast. Used to be hosted by Mehdi Hassan, now hosted by Ryan Grimm. Both under both of their tutelages. Is that the right word? Anyway, when both of them were hosting, it was great. I tried to do that thing where I use a word that's a bit bigger than I understand. Always a mistake. Let's go to some... I know you never have that problem, Ash. We're going to go to some super chats. So there's loads of them. Jane Hayward with a $5. Good to see Ryan Grimm on here. I'm a fan from watching Rising. Another great show with Crystal Ball. Lukewarm with a $5. Nice name. Presumably a pun. Tana Amadi Parker with a $5. Thank you very much. Richard Misjuk with a $5. Great coverage as always. Happy I subscribe. Here's some more money for the Talk Radio show. I presume you mean the phone-in show, which is definitely in the pipeline. We're really looking forward to that because we want more interplay with you guys. I want to ask you questions when I get these comments in. Dan with 20 quid. America, fuck yeah. And I don't know who you're supporting to be the president. And Finn Simpkins with 6 quid. Forza NM, my one and only news show. You're doing great work. Please don't go anywhere. I can't be fucked, I presume, with BBC and Channel 4. I'd say the only good things on those two channels is the documentaries. The documentaries are actually better than the news, which is why I'm not like defund the BBC. I'm like, well, I don't really want to defund any of it, but iPlayer documentaries, a lot of them are quite good. Just putting it out there. Right, we are going to go, we're going to shift our order slightly, and we're going to go straight to the End Sars protests. So for the past 2 weeks, a protest movement has rocked Nigerian politics and garnered worldwide attention under the hashtag #EndSARS. So SARS stands for the Special Anti-Robbery Squad, and they have a reputation for widespread brutality and corruption. Now, in response to the protest, the unit was disbanded on the 11th of October, but many people have judged that to be just window dressing, a superficial response from the government, and protests have continued. I think we can go to a clip now.
We're here because we believe in what we're fighting for. We're firm to it. And you know, if you listen to our national anthem and our national pledge, we are here to defend our unity.
We are fighting for the truth. We are fighting for the labor of our heroes past. We don't want it to be in vain.
I prefer to die well for my children to have a better tomorrow.
So this Tuesday, government repression intensified when shots were fired at demonstrators protesting in Lagos. In that particular incident, a massacre really, 12 people were killed, at least 12 people. That's according to Amnesty International. We can see some footage which allegedly shows officers firing on protesters.
Let them shoot, let them shoot. No problem! No problem! Everyone sit down, sit down, sit down!
There's loads more of footage like that showing sort of similar incidents, lots of really horrific images that you'll probably have seen, you know, the blood-soaked Nigerian flag. Really awful. The government were initially downplaying the shootings, but Nigeria's president has today announced that 69 people have been killed in the wave of protests. So they seem to be admitting what has gone on, although, you know, presumably they won't they won't admit everything to its full extent. But this is a development from the previous 2 days when political leaders in Nigeria have just been outright denying really that anything has happened. For an update on the situation on the ground, we can speak now to Tolu Olusoji, who is a journalist based in Lagos, who's been covering the protest. Welcome to the show, Tolu. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you for having me. Thanks for having me.
So my first question is about the significance of the president admitting how many people have died. I mean, we haven't independently confirmed that it was 69, but the president has come out and said 69 people have been killed in these protests. Yesterday, he came out and spoke to the public and sort of didn't make any admission that people had died. We've seen governors around Nigeria also sort of really underplay how many people were killed. So does this sort of represent a change in the government's stance towards these protesters and towards police abuse?
To be honest, it does not really, because the silence yesterday was really loud, and for him to make a louder impression, he has to back naming 69. No, he didn't even name. I mean, it was 69 51 for civilians, 11 policemen, and 7 for soldiers. So there has to be some sort of action that will follow it. It shouldn't be just numbers. So numbers won't do anything.
And in terms of the movement, so obviously, the initial demand was to end SARS. This particular unit of the police has now been disbanded. To what extent does that make it feel like these protests can achieve things? Or to what extent, is this just only the beginning? They've disbanded that police force, but obviously we've seen they're still committing horrific abuses.
SARS are still operating, but not like they would do before. They've disbanded them, but these people they've shown themselves to be bigger than the law in Nigeria. So they are still, because there's a Twitter handle that gives updates about where SARS are operating. And it is really crazy. The people that are meant to be protecting you have to get updates to kind of like run away from them. So they've recorded cases where SARS were operating in certain areas, but not like before. So, these all protesting has shown that youth should speak up when there is something like a rot in the system. And it has achieved a lot in a short period, but it hasn't been easy, but it has actually been a lot in a short period. So it has done a lot, but we can only, pressure the government to do more.
And finally, where do you see this movement going next? So obviously, after a repression of this extent, many people getting shot dead attending protests, it can go one or either way. One that can sort of, further anger people in the population and make the protests bigger. The other option is it sort of terrifies people and people feel like it's not worth going out to protest injustice if I might not come home again afterwards. What direction do you see this going in?
So one thing the president's speech did yesterday was to dampen the mood of protesters, because it did not mention anything. And then some groups that were organizing protests were like, people should just stay at home and obey the curfew order of their respective states. So people are not looking towards the 2023 elections, looking beyond the end-SARS thing. People are tired of a state run by old people. They want fresh ideas, people that can resonate with them, that can relate with them, not people that have archaic way of thinking, so to say. So people are looking beyond the end-SARS. There would probably still be more protests after the curfew, because in Lagos now we have 72-hour curfew. They're going to relax it tomorrow, but then we have currently 72-hour curfew that has been relaxed. So people are looking beyond the end-SARS protests, to be honest, and I think that's the better way to go, because you want to rid the Nigerian system of people who don't think alike with the core of the economy. And Nigeria has a lot of young people, very vibrant economy. So if you're having a state being run by old people, and then I don't think they would be able to look after you the way people your age would probably do.
Toluwala Soji, thank you so much for spending your time speaking to us this evening, and solidarity from all of us to everyone protesting against injustice in Nigeria right now.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, man. Thank you very much.
We are going to move to a story closer to home now. We've been to the United States, to Nigeria. Now we are very much back in the UK. Before we do this, if you're new to this show, subscribe to the channel. Even if you're not new to this show, subscribe to the channel. We need to get to 100,000. We think once that happens, YouTube are going to be a bit nicer to us. Sometimes there are copyright claims. You'll notice sometimes you come to watch these videos, it says not available in this area. That's not us that do that. That's YouTube. We think at 1,000K, that'd be really good. 100K, they'll answer our emails a bit sooner, quicker. It's a theory of ours. The row about the government's decision to deny free school meals to children from low-income families is continuing to roll on. Since the Tories voted against the motion on Wednesday, campaigning for free meals has gone from strength to strength. You've seen pubs and restaurants and cafes offer to give free meals to students who are who should be getting free school meals during Christmas, but who have been denied it by the Conservatives. Also, Marcus Rashford upping the campaign and councils. We'll talk about all of those updates in a moment. First of all, there are some new novel justifications from Conservatives coming out to explain why they think it was reasonable to vote against feeding Britain's poorest kids over Christmas. This was Nicky Morgan's novel explanation on last night's Question Time.
Well, I think the Labour Party might have found they got more supporters yesterday if the Deputy Labour leader hadn't called one of the Conservative MPs scum in the course of the debate. I mean, I have to say, yesterday's debate...
I'm not sure that anyone's defending that, but that's not exactly the point,
well,
is it?
The point is, if you want to build a coalition, we've heard comments saying it's unconscionable that the government didn't support this. Well, if the Labour Party had really wanted, and I think that Marcus Rashford, unfortunately, he complained about it becoming politicised, if the Labour Party really wanted support, they wouldn't have made it what's called an opposition day debate. There will be other ways to build a coalition in Parliament. And I should just challenge the fact that obviously his education secretary...
So was it a political reason then that the government didn't support it, or did the government not support it because it doesn't believe in it?
The government has put in money dramatically to expand free school meals anyway.
No, I get that. I'm just trying to understand why the government didn't support it yesterday. Is it because they didn't like the way Labour put the motion, or because the government doesn't believe in it on principle?
The government has spent over £300 million this year in making sure that school meal vouchers can be redeemed. And actually, to answer Joseph's point, that obviously when schools were not open in the spring and summer of this year, that is exactly when the government did put those hundreds of millions of pounds in to make sure that meals were available to those children who would otherwise be on free school meals. I personally think there are other ways. Anne's made a good point about needing an overall strategy. Quite right, we can't do that in the middle of a pandemic, but actually making sure we work with local authorities, for example, who are, the clues, free school meals. So we give support to children at school and pre-breakfast clubs and after-school clubs and everything else. But at other times, when the schools have been open, there are other ways in which to get money, and the government is putting money into local authorities. I'm sure we could do more to put money via local authorities to support families in need. But yesterday's handling of the debate, I say, watching that toxic debate in Parliament, watching the way that it was handled, Bridget knows if you want an issue really tackled, don't put it down as an opposition day motion if you want to build a coalition in Parliament.
So kids go hungry this Christmas because you don't like the parliamentary process?
If you really, the Labour Party, want to achieve, if you really want to get people supporting this debate, then as I say, labelling Conservative MPs unconscionable, unparliamentary words, and then the way that it was dealt, absolutely not. The government is putting that money in. The better thing would be to work together to make sure that actually local authorities and schools are able to get that money and help to support those children who are obviously otherwise not getting support at home.
What the hell is an unparliamentary word? I mean, you can't get out on national TV speaking to the general public who are pissed off because you're taking away food from hungry kids over Christmas in the middle of a pandemic and say, oh, it's because unparliamentary language was used. People don't speak like that. I mean, there were so many levels of terrible, dishonest argument in there from Nicky Morgan. So, I mean, on the one hand, she's saying, if you really want to change policy, don't put something forward as an opposition day debate. And Bridget Phillipson's answer was good there. So you're going to leave kids to go hungry because you don't like the way the parliamentary process ends. But also it's just factually wrong. So you will remember, we talked about it on this show, it got lots of coverage, that Marcus Rashford, the first time round he did this campaign, which was for school meals, free school meals to be extended over the summer holidays, the way that was won was by, again, Marcus Rashford making a big noise about it on Twitter, then Labour sort of coming in with a pincer movement and putting forward an opposition motion day debate. Then the government felt so embarrassed that they ended up changing policy because they didn't want it to go to a vote because they thought that too many Tories would vote with the Labour Party and they would lose. So they sort of preempted that debate and shifted. They U-turned, and that's why there were free school meals over the summer. So Nicky Morgan is saying, if you wanted to achieve this goal, you shouldn't have used exactly the same measure that you used last time around to achieve this goal. Doesn't make any sense. I mean, the other thing that doesn't make sense, when schools are open during term time, there is no need to feed kids during the holiday. It's like she thinks kids have these weird like hamster pouches where if you eat enough school dinners during term, you don't need any food during winter. It's bonkers. Ash, I want to bring you in on this. I mean, how bad is this making the whole Conservative Party look to the rest of the country?
I mean, you could see it in Nicky Morgan's face, couldn't you? Her cheeks were just blushing and reddening as she went on because she knew she had to fill the space and come up with a government line. But there is no way of defending this policy. So first she went in about Angela Rayner calling Chris Clarkson scum. I personally have no problem with this. I accept that the Speaker of the House, the Deputy Speaker in this case, is going to have a go at you. But I think calling a spade and scum is perfectly fine. And also I wrote an article about this yesterday, that we have this weird thing in our politics, which is we celebrate insulting language from political icons of the past, like Winston Churchill or, Harold Wilson or Dorothy Parker, but we say it's completely unbecoming when it happens in the present. But there's also a huge class element to it. So Boris Johnson can be as vulgar as he wants. And that, if anything, marks out that he's part of the ruling class, whereas Angela Rayner's got to abide by different rules. But Nicky Morgan was talking about a response that happened in a completely different parliamentary debate. So it was just squid ink time, just, completely muddy the waters. It's pathetic. It's the kind of thing which makes people feel nothing but disdain for the entire political system. You can see this person who ended up with a seat in the House of Lords just so she could keep a job with Boris Johnson after betraying him and then deciding not to betray him. And you just think, God, you're so venal, self-serving, and devoid of any morality. It's very rare that I look at another human being and feel disgusted, but I do. It's like watching a snake shed its own skin and then unhinge a jaw and eat an ostrich egg. It's just awful.
Ash, by being so rude about a Tory, it's probably your fault when they don't give kids food next summer. Every time someone is mean to a Tory, they have to punish an innocent child. That seems to be their new policy.
Every time you call a Tory scum, they snatch a sandwich out of a child's hand.
And then it's your fault. If you didn't want us to snatch the sandwich out of the child's hand, you, completely different, separate person, should not have called me scum. We are going to look at how the campaign has sort of developed. So on the one hand, you've sort of had an outpouring from restaurants and cafes, various institutions around the country saying, look, if the government's not going to stand in and free meals for children from low-income families, we'll do it. So lots of cafes and restaurants around the country have been saying this. Marcus Rashford, for his part, has spent the last 24 hours sharing these offers on his Twitter feed. If you go through his Twitter feed, he's got all of these different parts of the country advertising where you can get free meals if you need them over the holidays. Really powerful stuff. On top of that, you've got many councils who have stepped up and said they will fill the gap to provide food vouchers over the holidays. So that includes Labour-run Birmingham City Council, along with Redbridge, Hammersmith and Southwark councils in London. You've also had two Conservative councils who've said they'll step in and fill this gap that the government has left. So one of them is Staffordshire and the other is Kensington and Chelsea. Let's get up this tweet from Kensington and Chelsea. No kid should go hungry. We're supporting Marcus Rashford and providing pupils in the borough with free school meals over half term. Almost 3,300 youngsters will receive £15 vouchers to cover the cost of meals. Now, we should add, it's embarrassing for the Conservatives that Kensington and Chelsea Council are offering this. It's good in this particular circumstance if you live in Kensington and Chelsea, Kensington and Chelsea, that you can get these vouchers over the holidays. It's really important, really matters. But that council are still scum. They are the people who oversaw Grenfell, basically, and then, it seems, have spent quite a lot of time standing in the way of justice. Took them years to house people. This is not a council that care about poor people, but even they have found themselves to the left of this Conservative government, not just to the left of them, actively, they're putting themselves out there in opposition to the Conservative government, saying they've been too harsh to poor people. Even us, even the Grenfell causing council, maybe I'll get sued. I think it was their decisions that enabled it to happen. Anyway, we won't get into that. In any case, Tory or Labour, whatever council we're talking about, councils shouldn't have to stump up this cash. They're already cash strapped, and it definitely shouldn't be left to restaurants. But of course, both of their support is welcome. No one's going to complain, so good on them all. But we probably should draw a line somewhere, and I think it's here. So this is a tweet from Amazon, and they tweet, Marcus Rashford is a national hero and tweet all of these screenshots of him sharing, as I sort of explained to you before, the various pubs and cafes around the country who are offering meals to people on low incomes over the holidays. And for me, one, they're not even offering, as far as I can understand, they're not offering to send free food to people on low incomes. That would be, at least that'd be material change. They're just a complete virtue signaling tweet. But two, Amazon's sales surged 26% this year to £13.7 billion. If you really wanted to end hunger in this country, you could pay more than £293 million in tax. So that's 1/30th of their revenue this year, surging during coronavirus. Everyone else is having a terrible time. They're having an amazing time because people are getting so much delivered, and they can still only pay 1/30th of their revenue in tax. They could also maybe use some of that £13 million to pay workers the real living wage, or even, this is a novel thought, you could not have people so terrified of getting sacked that they don't go for any toilet breaks during their entire shifts. This is what Amazon does. And then their social media manager, I suppose, I don't want to attack the social media manager, but it does seem ridiculous when Amazon are tweeting out this kind of shit, which is totally in contradiction to how they've always behaved. Ash, your take on this?
Really struck me is that McDonald's came out and pledged to provide a number of school meals to children from deprived households during half term. And it got me thinking, how many children of McDonald's workers are going to need these meals? Overworked, underpaid, precariously employed, bad conditions. I wonder if there will literally be children of McDonald's workers who have got to take that offering, because I think it's important to point out that poverty no longer is simply the case of it's something that happens to you when you're not working. The majority of households in poverty in this country have got one or more people in work. So it's the phenomenon of the working poor, and the existence of the working poor facilitates the consolidation of monopoly capital, these outrageous profit margins, which are garnered by firms like Amazon or, even McDonald's for that matter. So it's not simply that there are the rich and there are the poor. It's that there are the poor because there are the rich, and vice versa. And I think that is crystallized within this food dynamic. It's a kind of way of seeing it in a tangible and super visible way.
So on Wednesday's show, we talked a lot about how various Tory MPs were trying to justify this. People say, we don't want to encourage dependency culture. Obviously, they're happy for you to be dependent on your boss to not have your kids starve, but they don't want you to be dependent on the state for school vouchers. Now, one of those people who was making these dumbass arguments was Ben Bradley. And while we were going live, I think, or just before we were going live, he has really, really, soiled himself on Twitter. Some really disgusting things coming out of his account. Can we get this up, Fox? So this was from just before we went live. At one school in Mansfield, 75% of kids have a social worker. 25% of parents are illiterate. Their estate is the centre of the area's crime. One kid lives in a crack den, another in a brothel. These are the kids that most need our help. Extending free school meals doesn't reach these kids. Yeah, but does it damage them? It's very bizarre. Then Adam, try in my best test, whoever that is, says, £20 cash direct to a crack den and brothel really sounds like the way forward with this one. Ben Bradley replies to this. Ben Bradley MP, blue tick. That's what free school meal vouchers in the summer effectively did. So Ben Bradley is saying free school meal vouchers in the summer effectively gave people £20 cash direct to go to a crack den and brothel. This is a Tory MP, an member of Parliament, sits in the Houses of Commons, and he is saying the reason we can't give people food vouchers is because last time we did it, it went straight to crack dens and brothels. First of all, where's your evidence for that? All of the main NGOs in this country, you've seen the Children's Commission, all of these people are coming out saying you should give these vouchers to parents so their kids can have food over the half term. They're saying this. All of the experts are saying this. And you're out here now making this completely bizarre, unevidenced claim that all of these vouchers went to crack dens and brothels. How the hell did this guy think that was an acceptable thing to write on Twitter? What the hell is going on here?
Ben Bradley is both vindictive and an idiot. And those have been the two major driving factors of his entire political career. He's the genius who, don't forget, directly accused Jeremy Corbyn of passing information to the Czech intelligence services and gave us that beautiful meme, please retweet, when his lawyers told him, look, you are going to be in big trouble. You're going to have to write a groveling apology, settle for an undisclosed amount, and also tweet this tweet with particular wording. So that's one thing, right? He's never been the sharpest tool in the shed. And then on the other hand, you've got this real vein of cruelty and disdain for the poor, which has been, again, a really consistent feature of his political life. He's the man who advocated that jobless people should get vasectomies. All right. These are ideas which would be seen as extreme in, Victorian philanthropist circles. He's not someone who I think takes economic justice particularly seriously. The irony is that just a week ago he was banging on about how, white privilege discourse and, all of this kind of stuff, sells out white working class kids. But at the same time, he's saying that if you give parents a meal voucher, which they can only spend on vouchers for their kids' lunches, that's equivalent to giving £20 to a brothel or a crack den. I mean, it's beyond hypocrisy. It's disgusting. I'm disgusted.
Right, final story. On Thursday, testimony given by Ghislaine Maxwell in a 2016 civil case between her and Jeffrey Epstein victim Virginia Giuffre was finally unsealed. Maxwell's lawyers had battled to keep the documents private, but a judge ruled against her. Now, there is not quite as much information in the documents as some of us had hoped. That's partly because so much of it is redacted, but also because Ghislaine Maxwell is very tight-lipped. She'd clearly been very well prepped, and she's very good at wasting time. It has some very surreal results, which we're going to go through in a moment. It is fair to say she doesn't come across as someone with nothing to hide in these documents. And to avoid answering questions, she often used really bizarre diversionary tactics, claiming not to understand what really basic words mean. It's a 465-page document, this deposition, which has now been unsealed. A judge demanded it be unsealed. And we're going to go through, some of the choice bits. Now, the first bit we're going to go to is about a puppet. And to understand the context here, we need to go back to, I know what you thought, why is he talking about a puppet? It will become apparent. To understand the context here, we need to go back to a document unsealed in August from the same civil case between Giuffre and Ghislaine Maxwell. Now, this is explained in the Mirror article, in a Mirror article from the time. So you can see Prince Andrew groped two girls. I think we can probably get the headline up. Prince Andrew groped two girls in Epstein mansion with spitting image puppet of himself. Now, this is obviously an allegation. This hasn't been confirmed, but it's an allegation by someone who's seen as a credible witness. We can go to the copy from that article for a bit of expansion here. Again, this is not from the deposition which was released today. This is the background. So they write, Joanna Soberg, 40, has previously described the encounter with Andrew and his spitting image puppet. She testified in a 2016 deposition in Jeffrey's civil defamation case against Maxwell, from which the newly released documents are taken. Soberg said on oath, I sat on Andrew's lap. They took the puppet's hand and put it on Virginia's breast, and so Andrew put his on mine. After many crude jokes later, Jeffrey claimed she was ordered to take Andrew to a dungeon massage room. So you've got claims from two women there, Soberg and Jeffrey, which both relate to this spitting image puppet of Prince Andrew. Really gross. Really terrible. But let's look at the relevant section of the deposition. And you can see what I mean by the diversionary tactics used by Ghislaine Maxwell. I'll read this to you and you see if you trust this woman. Now, the questions are from a lawyer or an attorney. And you can see Mr. Paglusia is Ghislaine Maxwell's lawyer. And then the answers are from Ghislaine Maxwell. So we can go to the first one, Fox. So were you ever in a room with, and from this redaction, we know it's Prince Andrew. You can sort of add that up from the later parts of this. Were you ever in a room with Prince Andrew in New York in Jeffrey Epstein's home where there was a puppet? The lawyer says objection. Ghislaine Maxwell says, what sort of puppet are you asking me? Any kind of puppet. Ghislaine Maxwell, you need to be more descriptive. I don't know what you mean by puppet. There is hand puppets, all sorts of puppets. Question, is there any puppet you've ever seen in Jeffrey Epstein's home in the presence of Prince Andrew? Ghislaine Maxwell. Again, puppet, there is lots of types of puppet. Then the question from the lawyer, any type of puppet. Ghislaine Maxwell, if you want to give me a description of the puppet, I would perhaps be able to say. Question, any type of puppet. Answer, can you be more detailed? Question, have you ever seen a puppet in Jeffrey Epstein's home in the presence of Prince Andrew? My understanding, and this is Maxwell, my understanding of a puppet is a small handheld item you have in a circus. I have never seen that. Then the question, have you ever seen a puppet which is defined as a movable model of a person or animal that is used in entertainment and typically moved either by strings or controlled from above or by a hand inside? So she's made the lawyer look up the definition of puppet before she'll be willing to answer the question. Totally bizarre. I mean, I'd call this contempt of court, but whatever. Let's go to the next bit. Then Ghislaine Maxwell says, I have not seen a puppet that fits exactly that description. Question, have you seen any puppet that fits that description? And then she says, can you re-ask the question, please? It's Ghislaine Maxwell. Yes. Have you seen any puppet that fits any description in the presence of Prince Andrew and Jeffrey Epstein? So this is really repetitive because it's a very repetitive interview. Now, Ghislaine Maxwell here completely changes the line. So she says, I am not aware of any small handheld puppet that was there. There was a puppet, not a puppet. There was I don't know how you would describe it really. I don't know how you would describe it. Not a puppet. I don't know how you would describe it. A caricature of Prince Andrew that was in Jeffrey's home. Did you use that caricature to put the hand of the caricature? Did you on? I think redacted breast. Objection from the lawyer. Ghislaine Maxwell. I don't recollect. I recollect the puppet, but I don't recollect anything around the puppet. You characterized a puppet, characterized it as it is. I don't know, as a characterization of blah. Do you recollect asking Virginia Roberts to sit on Prince Andrew's lap with a caricature of Prince Andrew? I do not recollect that. Now, this is not someone who is being open and honest. It's someone who is really trying to waste time. Completely bizarre. The same thing happened with regard to sex toys. Let's get this up now and then I'll go to you, Ash. So she's asked, do you recollect having sex toys at the Palm Beach house where Epstein lived? Answer, you have to define what you are talking about. Question, a sex toy meaning a vibrator of some kind. Sometimes they are called dildos, of that nature, anything like that. Answer, I don't recollect anything that would formally be a dildo, anything like that. Question, how would you define sex toys? Answer, I wouldn't describe sex toys. Question, did you have anything that was of an electronic nature that would be used during sex? Answer, I have no idea what you are referring to. And then you've got a load of redacted stuff. Now, I mean, Ash, I want to bring you in on this because I don't watch many trials, but the idea that you've got someone who's accused of, very serious things, who is, basically wasting the court's time by demanding everyone define the meaning of very simple words, which she clearly knows the meaning of. What the hell is going on here?
This is actually how the legal system ends up so stacked in favor of people who have access to limitless legal resources, i.e. they've got enough money to just drag out procedures. In lots of really high profile court trials, this is of course a deposition, but in a court trial, like for instance, the O.J. Simpson case, he's got a legal team which is, several people deep, right? Often has more staff working on it than the prosecutor's office, and just objecting to every single form and foundation of any question or any line of inquiry, hoping to just slow things down, take the wind out of, the prosecution sails and just muddy the waters, right? And that's the work of the defense. It's not to necessarily put up a credible defense, to debunk the facts and the accusations being put to them. It's just to create so much noise and so much bilge that you can't really access the truth. So I think that's how you should make sense of this. The second thing, and I think that we should actually spend more time perhaps in another show talking about Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein, is that we sometimes, and rightly so, we focus on the abuse as a way of explaining their relationship and connection to one another. The abuse that Epstein perpetrated on these trafficked girls and women. But I think that it's highly likely, and this is just my opinion, that there's a different story here, and it's to do with assets. It's been said that one of Jeffrey Epstein's roles as a financier was hiding ill-gotten assets for people. He also had an island in a tax haven, this, that, and the other. He was good at moving money and assets around. When Ghislaine Maxwell's father, Robert Maxwell, the disgraced press baron who had, they say he fell off his boat, which was named after her, the Lady Ghislaine, after he'd embezzled pension funds from the Mirror, I think it was, that they didn't recover all of the money that he'd embezzled, and no one really knows what happened to it. And I wonder if, and this is just a theory, which other people have said might be true, that Epstein helped conceal those assets, and that's a big part of why Ghislaine's so protective of him.
Well, the thing is here, Ash, or I'm a bit confused now, is there's two meanings of assets. So one of them is about, the big wealthy stuff, and he's good at hiding people's money. The other is he was an asset for, a secret service, which is the theory I'm more in. I think they probably worked for the secret services of one form or another. And
do you?
Yeah, so this is from our friends at True Anon, sort of explain why this is so plausible. I think it's probably true. Obviously, I can't confirm that. But the idea is that there's a lot of elements missing in the story, especially of how Jeffrey Epstein got his money. So if you watch the Netflix documentary, which is kind of the official story is he was a powerful man who could get away with awful crimes because he was so powerful. And it's fits into that Me Too narrative, which is obviously true, which is that powerful people can get away with awful things, especially powerful men can get away with awful things. But the alternative explanation is that the reason he was powerful is because he did awful things. So he was useful to elites and the establishment because he had these perversions. And the point of his pedo island, as it's called, is that it was fitted with lots of video cameras, and he would get compromat basically on important people for the secret services. And then they could use that, for whatever ends they wanted. I think it's kind of convincing. It hasn't been confirmed, but also it hasn't really been addressed properly by many people in the mainstream media because they prefer to go for the conventional narrative. I'm going to go to you on this, Ash, in one moment. First of all, I just want to go to two more sections from the deposition which are relevant to this particular theme. So, question. Do you know if Jeffrey Epstein had any relationship with the US government, either working for the CIA or the FBI in his lifetime? Ghislaine Maxwell, confidential. Now, that's not she said confidential. That's the court have found this to be something, or the judge or whoever's redacted is saying we can't reveal this. Then her lawyer says objection to the form of the foundation. She answers, I have no knowledge of that. Then, are you aware that Jeffrey Epstein has told people that he worked for the government to recover stolen funds? I'm going to avoid these objections because they're just everywhere. Ghislaine Maxwell, I don't recall conversations about that. Has he ever told you he worked for the US government? I don't recollect that. And then the next one, does Jeffrey Epstein have any affiliation with the Israeli government? Answer, I have no knowledge of that. Question, do you know if he ever performed any work for the Israeli government? Answer, I have no knowledge of that. Question, have you ever visited Israel with Jeffrey Epstein? Answer, I'm sorry, I don't recollect. Again, someone who's being very cagey with her answers. And I mean, clearly these ideas, which are very much underreported, basically, that there are some holes in the official story. There are quite a lot of things actually pointing to that they could have been working for secret services and isn't really explored by the mainstream media in the way that often they don't want to touch these things. Now, the relationship with the Israeli secret services, so Ghislaine Maxwell, her father, Robert Maxwell, wasn't just disgraced because he stole money from the pension pot. He also is quite widely known to have, most probably, in all balance of probabilities, been an agent for Mossad. So there are sort of connections here. It could all join up. Ghislaine Maxwell as well. Whenever anyone says they're a socialite, because socialite isn't a job, you got to remember. So whenever anyone is just famous as a socialite, what do they really do? You have to ask what they really do. And Jeffrey Epstein, again, what does he really do? He was, again, a financier and a socialite, but how did he make his money? They don't explain it. Ash, I want to go back to you on these theories.
Okay, so as for the Epstein money, right, how he generated that fabulous amount of wealth in quite a short period of time is contested. But one of the suggestions is that was actually a huge, securities fraud, which was investigated by the SEC. And it was his partner that went down for it, and Epstein wasn't touched. And that also, again, a huge portion of that money was never recovered. Now, this might confirm your security services theory, which is the reason why he wasn't touched is because he'd become useful as an asset and blah, 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 blah. But I do think that there are explanations for that money came from.
Yeah, well, I don't know. We'll go in detail through the Netflix
I think we should do like
documentary.
I think we should do. Maybe we could do a viewing party where we watch the documentary together and like goggle box it.
Yeah. So I mean, in the official story, he worked at a high grade public school teaching maths. And then he got given a job by the dad of Bill Barr, who is currently prosecuting Jeffrey Epstein, who's currently in charge of his prosecution. And then in this financial firm, like the whole thing, it doesn't really stack up, but we'll go through it in detail soon. But yeah, this deposition, I think, is showing you that Ghislaine Maxwell is on very, very shaky ground. And also that the mainstream media aren't asking the most interesting questions about this particular case because they don't want to touch it.
Shall we do a Gogglebox viewing of that documentary? As soon as my
that's a good idea,
done,
actually. That's a good idea.
I think we should do that and live stream it.
Although Netflix will probably take it down. Maybe you'll have to watch it live before it gets, copyright attacked or whatever. Anyway, it's been quite a long show this evening, but we have covered so much ground. Someone's saying Ash should listen to True and On. I recommend that. We had True and On on a recent Tysky Sour podcast. So interesting. Again, they have to say allegedly a lot because a lot of this we don't know. We can only speculate. But it is, it's also our job to speculate. Right. Ash, it has been an absolute pleasure speaking to you this evening. I'm so glad you could come on, even with your COVID positive test. But of course, everyone in our audience wants you to know that if you do feel under the weather, get some rest, have some you time. There's never any pressure to come on when you're suffering from a novel coronavirus.
I know, but what if I'm suffering for lack of Michael? What's the vaccine for that?
I am. Some people call me a therapeutic, but I think I'm a cure. Let's end there. Thank you so much for watching Tysky Sour this evening. Thank you to all of our guests. We'll be back on Monday at 7 p.m. We have 1,500 of you 1,600 of you watching this. We only have 626 likes. Let's get that to over 1,000 in the next 5 minutes. Helps us in the algorithm and our self-esteem. Always nice to have a little boost before the weekend. Enjoy your weekend, whatever tier you live in. I hope you find some way to have fun or at least relax. We'll be back on Monday at 7 p.m. You've been watching Tysky Sour on Novara Media. Good night.